I'm feeling like hot.
We need you to understand something before we tell you what happened. We know how this sounds. My sister Clara and I have replayed it in our minds 1,000 times since that week, and every single time one of us speaks a detail aloud, it still sounds utterly impossible. Two grown women, rational people with careers and mortgages and meticulously planned lives, claiming to have experienced something that unravels the very fabric of what we've been taught about the natural world. But we were both there. Both of us saw the same things, heard the same things, felt the same impossible moments press against our skin. And when two people witness something together, when they can validate every impossible detail for each other, when they both carry the same unbelievable truth in their bones, it becomes harder to dismiss, harder to explain away as a shared delusion or a trick of the light. We are twins, identical in every way that matters, and we have navigated this world as a single unit our whole lives. We know the subtle tells of the other's heart, the flicker of an eye that betrays a lie or an exaggeration. And we are telling you now, with a certainty that has become the new bedrock of our existence, that what we're about to describe actually happened. Every word of it, every impossible, heart-stopping moment, including the part that seems most unbelievable of all, the part where the creature actually spoke to us, not in grunts or animalistic cries, but in a clear, perfectly formed human word that we both heard, that we both understood, that came from something that was not human at all. Our grandmother Eleanor left us her cabin in the Cascade Mountains when she passed away 6 years ago. She had owned it for nearly half a century, having built it with our grandfather when they were young and filled with the kind of adventurous spirit that saw wilderness not as a challenge, but as a home. Our grandfather passed before we were born, but Eleanor kept the cabin, her sanctuary, making the pilgrimage several times a year until her body grew too frail for the journey. She loved that place with a fierce, quiet passion that she reserved for very few things. When she knew her time was ending, she made us promise to be its custodians, to keep it in the family, to use it as she and our grandfather had, as a place to disconnect from the noise of the world, a place to simply be. We have honored that promise with a devotion that borders on religious. Several times a year, usually in the vibrant burst of spring or the golden sigh of autumn, we pack up Clara's old Subaru and drive out there together. It has become our ritual, our escape, our way of reinforcing the bond between us and honoring our grandmother's memory. The cabin is nestled deep in the mountains of northern Washington, a good 3 hours from the nearest town of any consequence. The final hour of the drive is a crawl along an old, forgotten logging road, a treacherous ribbon of dirt and gravel scarred with ruts and washouts, where the forest presses in so close on either side that it feels like driving through a green tunnel. Most people don't even know the road exists. The cabin itself is a testament to simplicity, a single large room with a pot-bellied wood stove for heat and a small cooking alcove. A sturdy ladder leads to a loft where the bed resides. A hand pump draws clean, cold water from the well. An outhouse stands a respectable 30 yards away, hidden amongst the firs. There is no electricity, no plumbing, no cell service, no internet, nothing modern except for what we carry in. But it is perfect. It is a place where we can unplug completely, where the only rhythm is the rising and setting of the sun, where we can exist together without the incessant static of the modern world. This particular trip was in early October. The aspens were a riot of shimmering gold, and the birch leaves were turning a fiery yellow-orange. The air had that crisp, clean autumn feeling that invigorates the soul, that perfect temperature where a jacket is necessary in the morning chill, but by afternoon, a simple flannel shirt feels just right. We drove up on a Thursday, both of us having taken Friday off work for a long weekend. The drive was breathtaking, the cascades showing off their autumnal splendor, and we stopped multiple times just to breathe the pine-scented air and take photos that could never do the scenery justice. By the time we pulled up to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon, the stress of our city lives had melted away, leaving us relaxed, happy, and ready for a few days of profound peace. The cabin looked just as we'd left it 2 months prior. A blanket of leaves and pine needles covered the porch, and a few branches had been brought down by late summer storms, but the structure itself stood solid and welcoming. That first evening was a comfortable routine of settling in. We brought our supplies inside, swept the floors, and got a fire crackling in the wood stove to chase away the encroaching chill. Dinner was simple. Pasta with sauce from a jar and some crusty bread we'd bought at a bakery on the way. As the sun went down, we sat on the porch steps, wrapped in old wool blankets, watching the sky bleed from pink to orange through the silhouettes of the trees. We listened to the evening symphony of the forest. The first tentative calls of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, and beneath it all, that deep, resonant quiet that only exists in true wilderness. We didn't talk much. We never need to. We've always been fluent in the language of shared silence, a gift of our twinship. Presence is enough. We went to bed early, climbing the ladder to the loft, where the old iron frame bed sits beneath a window that frames the stars. We fell asleep to the sound of the wind whispering through the pines and the distant, lonely hoot of an owl. That first night was utterly normal, perfectly peaceful, exactly the balm our weary souls had craved. The second morning began in the same idyllic fashion. We woke around 7, roused by the gentle insistence of sunlight stretching across our faces. Clara made coffee on the wood stove, using our grandmother's old enamel percolator, while I made toast with a local huckleberry jam we'd purchased from a roadside stand. We ate breakfast standing at the window, watching the morning mist weave its way between the ancient trees. The weather was perfect again, cool but not cold, bathed in that golden autumn light that makes everything look ethereal. After breakfast, we took a short walk, a familiar loop through the woods surrounding the cabin, reacquainting ourselves with the land. We spotted some promising mushrooms, saw the delicate tracks of a deer family, and found a massive pine that had fallen since our last visit, its trunk split cleanly by lightning. The forest was vibrant and alive, just as it should be. By mid-morning, we were back on the porch, with books and fresh mugs of coffee, soaking in the tranquility. The temperature had warmed nicely, and we'd draped our jackets over the railing. I was lost in a dense historical novel, Clara in a collection of poetry. We were perhaps an hour into our reading, completely absorbed in our separate worlds, when we first heard the sounds. At first, we both dismissed it as just another voice in the forest's chorus. The woods are full of sounds, birdsong, the chatter of squirrels, the groan of branches, the rustle of wind in the leaves. But as we listened more intently, both of us lowering our books and focusing, we realized this sound was different. It was a whimper, almost like crying. But it didn't sound like any animal we knew. It wasn't the eerie, almost human cry of a coyote, nor the call of a bird or a fox. There was a profound wrongness to it, a quality of distress that made the fine hairs on our arms stand on end. It made us look at each other, a silent question passing between us. The sound was intermittent. It would stop for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then begin again. Each time, it seemed to be coming from the same direction east of the cabin, perhaps a 15-minute walk into the forest. It wasn't moving, which suggested something stationary. We discussed it in hushed tones, speculating. An injured animal, perhaps. Something caught in a trap left by poachers. But the quality of the sound was so disturbingly close to human that no explanation felt right. Finally, our shared empathy won out. We had to investigate. If something was out there suffering, we had to at least see if we could help. We set our books aside, grabbed the sturdy walking sticks that leaned against the cabin wall, and headed into the trees, following the sound. We moved carefully, stepping over exposed roots and around thorny bushes, trying to be quiet. The whimpering continued as we walked, a sorrowful beacon guiding us deeper into the woods. The sound grew clearer, but not necessarily louder, confirming we were getting closer. It was definitely whimpering, and at times it sounded so much like a small child crying, muffled as if their face were pressed into a pillow, that a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I could see the same unease reflected in Clara's eyes. After about 12 minutes of weaving through the dense woods, we arrived at a small clearing, a sun-dappled space created years ago by a fallen giant. Late-season wildflowers, asters and goldenrod, grew in patches. The whimpering was very close now, very distinct. It seemed to be coming from just beyond a thicket of bushes at the far edge of the clearing, no more than 20 feet from where we stood. We approached with a slow, cautious deliberation, our hearts hammering against our ribs, though neither of us could have articulated why. It was just a feeling, a primal sense of anticipation, of standing on the precipice of something significant. The walking sticks felt heavy and solid in our hands. We pushed through some low-hanging branches, stepped around a moss-covered stump, and reached the bushes. Together, in a single, synchronized movement, we carefully parted the branches and looked through. And then we froze. Utterly and completely. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. We couldn't. Our brains simply ceased to function for several seconds, short-circuited by an image that had no place in our reality, that didn't fit into any known category of existence. There, in a small hollow behind the bushes, stood a creature, upright on two legs. It was small, no more than 3 feet tall, and covered entirely in thick, soft-looking fur the color of dark, reddish-brown soil. But it was not a bear. We had seen enough bears, including cubs, to know this was fundamentally different. The proportions were all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees would be. Its legs were too straight, too slender, too much like human legs. And its face was the most astonishing thing we had ever seen. It was turned toward us, and we could see it clearly through the foliage. It had startlingly human-like features, though covered in fine hair, a flattened nose, not a snout, full, expressive lips, a rounded face with a prominent brow ridge, and the eyes. The eyes were enormous dark pools, probably twice the size of human eyes relative to its face, and they were staring right at us, filled with an emotion that was instantly, heartbreakingly recognizable. Pure, unadulterated fear. This creature was terrified of us. My first coherent thought, once my brain rebooted, was that this must be what people called Bigfoot or Sasquatch. We'd all heard the stories, seen the grainy photos and shaky videos, but we had never given them a moment's serious thought, dismissing them as folklore or hoaxes. Yet here, standing before us, was something that matched the descriptions, except it was a child, a baby, a juvenile of a species that wasn't supposed to exist. The creature began to back away as soon as it registered our presence, its whimpering growing louder, more distressed. It was utterly terrified of us. Those huge eyes were wide with fear, and its small body was trembling visibly. In that instant, we saw the situation from its perspective. We were the monsters. Two towering, strange-looking beings, crashing through the bushes, looming over it while it was alone and vulnerable. We both reacted on pure instinct, an instinct that in retrospect was probably incredibly foolish and dangerous. We slowly knelt down at the same time, a mirrored movement that was second nature to us, trying to make ourselves smaller and less threatening. We held up our hands, palms out, in what we hoped was a universal gesture of peace. And we began to make soft, soothing sounds, the kind you'd use to calm a frightened animal. Gentle shushing noises and low hums. We kept our voices quiet and even, murmuring reassurances we knew it couldn't understand in language, but hoped it would in tone. We weren't thinking about the danger. We weren't thinking about the cardinal rule of the wilderness. If you find a baby animal, its mother is almost certainly nearby. And a mother protecting her young is the most dangerous force in nature. A mother bear will attack without hesitation. We had no idea what a mother of this creature would be capable of. For all we knew, she was watching us at that very moment from the shadows of the trees, deciding if we were a threat. But in that moment, all we saw was a small, terrified being that needed gentleness. So we stayed there, kneeling side by side, our hands outstretched, speaking in the calmest voices we could manage, telling it that we wouldn't hurt it, that everything was okay. The small creature stopped backing away. It stood watching us, its head tilted slightly, as if trying to puzzle us out. We could almost see the thoughts churning behind those expressive eyes. We remained like that for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, a silent, tense tableau. Then, very slowly, the creature took a single, hesitant step forward. We stayed completely still, barely breathing, terrified of scaring it away. It took another step, then stopped again, its gaze shifting between our faces and our extended hands. This cautious dance continued for what must have been 15 or 20 minutes. A few tentative steps forward, followed by a long pause as it assessed the situation. With each step closer, we could make out more details. Its face was astonishingly childlike beneath the fur. The underlying bone structure seemed remarkably human. A flat nose, full lips that pressed together in concentration, a rounded chin. The fur on its face was shorter than on the rest of its body, and we could see hints of dark, almost black skin underneath. The eyes were the most captivating feature, so large and dark, like pools of ink, but they weren't vacant like an animal's. There was thought there, awareness, emotion, fear, yes, but also a burgeoning curiosity, intelligence. I glanced at Clara and saw the same dawning recognition in her face. This wasn't just an animal, this was something more. Its hands, too, looked remarkably human, just covered in the same reddish-brown fur. 5 long fingers on each hand, tipped with what looked like fingernails, not claws. It kept flexing them nervously, a very human gesture of anxiety. Its small chest rose and fell rapidly with its heavy breathing. It was still scared, but curiosity was beginning to win. Eventually, it stopped about 5 feet away from us, a distance that seemed to be its limit of comfort. We kept talking softly, our hands still extended but not reaching for it, making ourselves as non-threatening as possible. Bit by bit, the creature seemed to relax. Its breathing slowed, and the tension in its small body eased. The whimpering stopped completely. We told it we just wanted to help, that it was safe. We don't know if it understood the words, but it clearly understood the intent. After nearly half an hour of this careful negotiation, the creature took another step forward, then another, until it was close enough to touch us. We still didn't move. This had to be its choice. That's when it reached out one small, furry hand and touched my arm. The lightest of touches at first, a single finger brushing against my skin. It was so gentle, so tentative. Then it pressed its whole hand flat against my forearm, its fingers tracing the smooth, hairless texture as if fascinated. It looked from my arm to its own furry one, a look of comparison on its face. Then it moved to Clara, touching her face with the same light, exploratory gentleness, its fingers tracing her cheek, her jaw. It went back and forth between us, clearly perplexed by our identical appearance, making small, soft sounds of what seemed like confusion. In those moments, we felt a profound, unspoken connection. This was not an animal acting on instinct. This was an intelligent, aware being, capable of thought and wonder. Its eyes met ours as it touched our faces, and we saw a flicker of understanding, a recognition of us as other thinking beings. We studied it just as carefully. When it opened its mouth slightly, we saw small white teeth that looked more human than animal. We noticed the deliberate way its fingers moved, the way its brow would furrow in concentration. Reality began to seep back in. The sun was higher now, likely approaching noon. This was a baby, all alone. We scanned the clearing, the trees, the underbrush, listening for any sound of something larger approaching. We heard nothing, only the normal sounds of the forest. Where was its mother? The question hammered at us. Baby animals, especially intelligent ones, do not wander alone. Something was wrong. We made a decision then, a foolish and potentially dangerous one, but it felt like the only humane choice. We couldn't leave this small creature here to fend for itself. I gently took its small hand. Its fur was surprisingly soft against my palm. It didn't pull away. It just looked at our joined hands, then up at my face, as if asking what was next. We stood up slowly, still holding its hand. The creature stood straighter, watching us. We began walking back toward the cabin, taking slow, small steps. After a moment's hesitation, it walked beside us. Its gait was a strange, fluid motion, not quite human, not quite ape. It looked up at us every few steps, as if for reassurance. The walk back felt completely surreal, like a dream. Here we were, holding hands with a baby Bigfoot, leading it through the forest like a lost child. We found ourselves talking to it in quiet, gentle tones, telling it about the cabin, that it would be safe there. The creature was quiet but made occasional small huffs and hums, its surprisingly strong grip never leaving my hand. When we reached the edge of the clearing where our cabin stood, the creature stopped, its eyes wide. It had clearly never seen a building before. To this creature, our simple, weathered cabin must have seemed like an impossible alien structure. I gave its hand a gentle squeeze and led it forward. We walked up the 3 porch steps, and I opened the creaking door. It tensed at the sound, but followed us inside. It looked around the dim interior with those enormous eyes, taking in the wooden walls, the furniture, the wood stove, the shelves of books and cans. Everything was new and strange. It gently touched the wall, ran its fingers along the table. We let go of its hand, and it immediately looked at us with concern, so we showed it our open palms and smiled. We moved to the small kitchen area, narrating our actions in soft voices. We heated some vegetable soup we'd made the day before, poured it into a bowl and brought it over. As we held out the bowl, we said the word clearly, in unison. Food. We pointed at the bowl. Food. The creature sniffed it cautiously, its nostrils flaring. It looked at us, a question in its eyes. Clara took a spoon and demonstrated, but the creature found it clumsy. After a few failed attempts, it gave up, lifted the bowl with both hands, and drank the soup directly, making small, satisfied humming sounds. When it finished, there was soup smeared around its mouth, and the sight was so endearing, so much like a messy toddler, that we both smiled. It was clearly ravenous. When the bowl was empty, it looked up at us, and in its gaze we saw something like trust. After eating, it seemed more energetic and began to explore the cabin with growing confidence. Clara remembered a small rubber ball we'd brought. She took it out and bounced it once on the wooden floor. The creature's eyes lit up as if she had performed magic. When the ball bounced near it, it snatched it up and tried to bounce it itself. When it succeeded, it let out an excited, high-pitched sound that could only be described as laughter. We played together for nearly an hour, rolling and bouncing the ball. It was exactly like playing with a human child. But the worry about its mother lingered. While Clara played with it, I slipped outside and walked back to the clearing where we'd found it. I searched for any signs of another larger creature. I found some deep impressions in the soft earth that could have been large footprints, but they were indistinct. I tried to follow them, but the trail vanished after 20 yards. I spent 40 minutes searching in widening circles, but found nothing conclusive. No calls, no tracks, no sign that anyone was looking for this lost baby. When I returned to the cabin, the afternoon light was turning golden. Evening was approaching. We looked at each other, the unspoken decision passing between us. We couldn't put it back outside in the dark, vulnerable to predators. We would keep it safe for the night. In the morning, we would search again. As darkness fell, the creature grew anxious, staying within a few feet of one of us at all times. We realized it was used to the safety of its mother at night. We made a soft nest for it on the loft floor with extra blankets. For dinner, we heated up some canned stew. As we handed it the bowl, we said the word again, food. It ate hungrily. After dinner, it was clearly exhausted, yawning and rubbing its eyes with its small, furry hands. We led it to the blanket nest, but it wouldn't settle, whimpering softly and looking at us with those big dark eyes. It needed us close. We sat down on the floor beside it, gently stroking its head. The fur was thick and warm. One of us began humming a lullaby our grandmother used to sing. The other joined in with the harmony. The creature's breathing slowed, and its eyes began to close. But every time we tried to move, it would stir and whimper in panic. So we stayed, sitting on the hard wooden floor, our hands resting on its small back, feeling the rise and fall of its breath until it finally fell into a deep sleep. We crept to our own bed but couldn't sleep, our minds racing. Around midnight it began to cry out in its sleep, clearly having a nightmare. We rushed to its side, stroking its fur and whispering reassurances until it calmed. Clara ended up sleeping on the floor next to it for the rest of the night, while I kept watch from the bed. Several times, it reached out a hand in its sleep, just to touch one of us, to make sure we were still there. Morning came with the creature gently patting my face to wake me. It seemed curious and alert. We ached from the uncomfortable night, but we made coffee and heated up oatmeal for all of us. As we gave the creature its bowl, we said the word once more, food. After breakfast, Clara went outside to the outhouse. When she came back and opened the cabin door, she froze on the threshold. She could hear a small voice inside. My heart pounded. The creature was standing near the kitchen counter, looking at the empty oatmeal pot. It turned to look at Clara, then at me, and then, very clearly, it spoke. Food. One simple word, perfectly pronounced, unmistakably clear, like any human child would say it. We stood there, paralyzed, our minds struggling to process the sound. The other one of us had heard it too, her eyes wide with disbelief. It had seen us say the word multiple times while giving it meals. And in less than 24 hours, this impossible creature had learned the word, connected it to the concept, and used it to communicate a need. This wasn't mimicry. This was language. This was an intelligence that shattered every known boundary. Our hands trembled as we scraped the last of the oatmeal into its bowl. The rest of the day passed in a haze. We pointed to other objects, saying their names, ball, cup, window, but it only watched us, its dark eyes focused on our mouths. It didn't repeat another word, just that one, food, the one that mattered most. That afternoon, while I stayed with the creature, Clara went out to search again, walking for over an hour in widening circles, finding nothing. The second night was easier. The creature seemed more comfortable, curling up in its nest on its own, though it still wanted us close. Later that night, we woke to find it had climbed into bed and squeezed itself between us, seeking the comfort of our warmth. We let it stay. The third morning, we awoke to find the creature already awake, sitting up and listening intently, making small, alert sounds. It seemed to sense something outside. After breakfast, we decided to take it for a walk near the cabin. It explored with childlike curiosity, climbing on logs and touching plants, but never strayed more than a few feet from us. We were about 50 yards from the cabin when we heard a low sound that chilled our blood, a deep, menacing growl. The creature froze. Then we saw it, a large mountain lion moving through the trees to our left, its body low to the ground in a predatory stalk. It had spotted the small creature, seeing it as easy prey. Everything happened in a flash. The lion began to move toward us, and the creature behind us let out a cry of pure terror. Without a second of thought, we both stepped in front of it, placing our bodies between it and the predator. We raised our arms to look bigger and began yelling at the top of our lungs, waving our walking sticks like weapons. The lion paused, its yellow eyes calculating the risk. I grabbed a rock and threw it as hard as I could. It landed with a thud near the cat, which flinched back. We kept screaming, making ourselves as loud and threatening as possible. The standoff lasted only a minute, but it felt like an hour. Finally, the lion decided we weren't worth the fight. It turned and melted back into the forest. Our legs felt weak with adrenaline. We turned around. The creature was pressed against the back of our legs, trembling. It reached up and grabbed both our hands, holding on like we were its only anchors in the world. Clara scooped it up into her arms, and it wrapped its arms around her neck, holding on for dear life. We carried it back to the cabin, its small body shaking against hers. For the next hour, it wouldn't leave our laps, needing the constant reassurance of our touch. The rest of the day was quiet. We all stayed inside, shaken. A new, deeper bond had been forged in that moment of shared danger. That night, it climbed directly into bed with us, curling up between us as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On the fourth morning, it woke and touched our faces gently, as if to make sure we were real. Throughout the day, it kept going to the door, looking out and making soft, plaintive sounds. It missed its family. We sat with it, our hearts aching for it. That evening, its restlessness grew. It kept pacing between us and the door, making its calling sounds more insistently. Around 9 o'clock, we heard it, heavy, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. Something huge. The creature became ecstatic, vibrating with excitement, scratching at the door and making urgent, happy sounds. This wasn't danger, this was family. Our hearts pounding with anticipation, we opened the door. The small creature rushed past us and down the steps. There, at the edge of the trees, stood an enormous figure, at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in the same dark reddish-brown fur. It was the mother. The small one ran to her, making joyous, crying sounds. The mother bent down and gathered her child into her massive arms, checking it over for injuries. The baby chattered away, pointing back at the cabin, at us, clearly telling its story. Once satisfied her child was unharmed, the mother stood to her full height. She was immense, powerful, and utterly intimidating. She looked directly at us, and her eyes held an intelligence so profound, so aware, that it felt like she was looking straight into our souls. We were frozen, pinned by her gaze. The moment stretched on. She knew we had cared for her child. What did she think? We couldn't read her alien features. Then she made a low, resonant sound from deep in her chest. She looked at us one last, long time. Then she shifted the baby in her arms. The baby turned its head and looked at us over its mother's shoulder. Those big, dark eyes found ours in the dim light. And then it raised one small, furry hand and waved. A small, hesitant wave. A goodbye. A thank you. Our throats were too tight to speak, but we managed to raise our own hands and wave back. The mother turned, and with impossible silence for something so large, glided into the darkness of the forest. The baby kept looking back, its small hand still raised, until they disappeared completely. We stood on that porch for a long time, the forest now utterly silent. When we finally went back inside, the cabin felt cavernously empty. The rubber ball lay on the floor, the empty bowl sat on the table. Physical proof that it had all been real. We felt hollowed out, exhausted, but also profoundly grateful that the family was whole again. The next 2 days were lonely. On our last morning, we walked to the clearing where we'd first found it. We left an offering of bread, apples, and nuts at the base of a tree. As we set it down, we whispered the word together: food. Before we drove away, we walked back one last time to check. The food was gone. All of it. We stood there looking at the empty spot, and we both smiled. We liked to think it was them. We drove home with a secret we could never tell, a story no one would ever believe, but it changed us. We know now that there are mysteries in the wild places, intelligent beings living in the shadows. We were part of that mystery. We had held a lost child's hand, kept it safe, and heard it speak. We still go to the cabin. We haven't seen them again. But sometimes we feel like we're being watched, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet curiosity. Every time we visit, we leave an offering at the base of that tree. Sometimes it's gone when we leave, sometimes it isn't, but we keep doing it. A message, a reminder. We hope that baby, grown now, remembers the two strange, identical humans who were kind. We hope it still knows that one word, that bridge between our worlds. Food, one simple word that proved everything. That knowledge, shared between us and them, is the secret we will carry for the rest of our lives. It was real, all of it, and it was enough.